My name is Daniel H. Wilson. I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm a Cherokee citizen, and my new novel is Hole in the Sky. It's a story of native first contact with an alien entity that takes place where I grew up on tribal land in northeastern Oklahoma.
You come from a more like engineering background, though, right?
Yeah, I started out wanting to be a science fiction author. That didn't work out for me when I was a teenager. So I studied science as a consolation prize to science fiction. And so I studied computer science over at the University of Tulsa. And then I went to Carnegie Mellon and did a full PhD in robotics before finally someone was interested in reading some of my science fiction. And so I never got a job after that. I just kept writing science fiction. Started out with nonfiction, and then eventually I wrote Robopocalypse, which did real well, and I've been able to write science fiction novels ever since.
So, do you believe in aliens?
Dude, a big part of this book is, like, I used to have very clear ideas about what was science fiction and what was science, and I had done some work as a threat forecaster for the United States Air Force, where they hire science fiction authors and they brief them on technologies that they're worried about. And then they have analysts that add detail to everything, and you write science fiction stories describing potential sort of threat scenarios that could fall out. And so as a result of writing that and getting more involved in the military community, I started talking to Air Force people about unidentified anomalous phenomena. And that's, through those interactions, I realized that the Air Force is really serious about this stuff. And they say they don't know what it is, and they say that it's more technologically advanced than anything any foreign state has or individual. And so part of the genesis of this novel was me realizing, whoa, what if first contact is really something that we're going to experience in our lifetimes? How are we going to react to that? And I think a lot of our reaction is going to have to do with our posture toward the unknown. And so that's really what I was examining in this novel.
So, did you pull a lot from that government experience when you were writing the character, some of the governmental agent characters?
Yeah, for sure. So there's three main characters, and all three of these people come straight out of my own experiences in life. So one character is a CIA weapons analyst. He's sort of the soldier character, but he's really comes through the military more from the intelligence side and through, there are lots of academics in the military, so there'll be a general of math, they'll teach it like West Point or whatever. So that soldier character really came from my threat forecasting work. And then there's a NASA astrophysicist, and that really comes from just all the time I've spent, in academia, doing research, and also from all the research I did for the Andromeda evolution, which was a sequel to the Andromeda strain that was authorized by the Crichton family. And for that one, I toured NASA Johnson and got like this super mega in-depth tour of everything out there. It was amazing. So a lot of that went into my NASA character, who's a scientist. And then Spyro, I grew up out there. So I grew up going to our family's farm, which is just a couple miles north of Spyro near Salisaw. And that's a guy, who lives in a single wide trailer and like lives with the Spyro mounds in his backyard. And that was an experience I had growing up. My grandfather lived, out that way. And so there's a little bit of myself in all three of these characters, and all three of the way that they think about the unknown.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the book, is science fiction, which seems to pull a lot from your background in science, but I'm curious how familiar you were with some of the more native mythology.
Yeah. So I did a lot of research. This was the most fun part of the book, right? Like, growing up in Oklahoma, there's a lot of native people around, and there's nobody giving you lessons on being native, right? It isn't, for me anyway, it wasn't like that. I didn't have a super traditional sort of upbringing in that way, but you were around it, And so a lot of what I took for granted when I left Oklahoma, what I thought was normal, I realized like, oh, wow, no, that comes from living in a place where there's a lot of native people around, right? Certain just perspectives and just, stuff you do, things you think's normal. But I did a lot of research. And so what I did was I was out looking for, oral traditions, legends, mythologies, cosmologies, but I started thinking of it as Cherokee science fiction. So like there's like the Star Woman oral tradition about a star woman that came from the Pleiades constellation and brought Cherokee people to Earth and let them out and then flew up into the sky and became the Dark One. We can't see her. And I mean, that's like Native people flying around in spaceships. I'm like, okay, this is awesome. So, I worked in a lot of Cherokee mythology that I found out there that I thought, look, these are stories that if you heard them in a different time, you'd think of them as science fiction. And that's how I present them in here.
Yeah. One of my favorite bits from the book was about how one of the characters was describing that mythology that you're talking about and how eventually she would come back to take them home.
Yeah.
Is that something that you, I guess, felt akin to, that feeling of like not feeling like you quite belonged where you were?
So there's a lot of issue about like Native identity, I think. And it's kind of a catch-22. I find that people that, when you grow up in a place like Oklahoma, which is really special in terms of, the way reservations work here is different. The way tribal sovereignty is just sort of taken for granted out here in a way that I don't think it's the same other places. But a lot of times you're around a lot of Native people and you think, I'm not Native enough, right? I know real Indians, and like it's easy to think that way and then sort of have your identity be fractured in that way. But if you're not from a reservation, if you're not from a place where there's a lot, then you feel the same. Then even, and so there's all these different pressures in the world that are trying to pull us away from our Native identity. And, part of writing this book, part of my career is just claiming it, and saying, look, this maybe doesn't conform to stereotype or anything like that. This is science fiction. This is Native people in space in the future. But guess what? That's what Native looks like now, because that's what we're making, right? And so it is just by being. If that makes sense to you.
Yeah. You were telling me earlier that this was the longest you kind of have spent back in Tulsa for a while. Does it feel like still coming back home to you?
Oh man, yes. It's crazy. Like the sounds, the cicadas, the blue jays, the trains of my neighborhood, like the smells. Oh, it all brings me right back to being a kid, to just, and also, I went to college here. So I didn't leave until I was an adult. But yeah, it's amazing to come back home. And also I love hearing the accents. I grew up in North Tulsa, and it's very different than Portland, Oregon, where I live now. And I love all the people I'm seeing, all the sounds I'm hearing, all the conversations I overhear, the clothing I see people. It's just, yeah, I'm having a great time. Yeah.
Well, we talked about the mythology, but I would like to talk about the science and the work that you kind of did for depicting of technology in this book. Did you work a lot on trying to make all the aspects of the science really plausible?
Yeah, I mean, I always do that. So I'm always really deep into world building, but what I really dove into with this novel that kind of sets it apart from something like the Andromeda evolution or even Robopocalypse to an extent is that I really dove into indigenous technology. So kind of old techniques and old methodologies that when we look at them now, we don't even see it as technology. We think of it as primitive, but it's actually advanced. And so even the entity itself, the thing that comes down, the real sort of the main attraction, of an alien invasion story, it's indigenous. And as a result, it's not what you expect, right? It isn't. And there's even a part where one of my favorite characters says, she's like, shit, why couldn't this have just been like a good-looking robot with a silver shirt? He walks down the ramp, like he gives us an ultimatum or whatever, right? And this just isn't that story. Like we've seen that story so many times. And so really trying to think about what does super advanced indigenous technology look like, and can we even recognize it? That's something I spent a lot of time on. And I think it's going to surprise a lot of readers because it isn't what they're expecting. And it's a lot more unique and abstract.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm curious about how you went about, like, just sort of drawing that line from historical indigenous technology to trying to speculate what it would look like,
Yeah.
if things had continued, like,
Yeah.
uninterrupted.
So I drew out some. I mean, I'm a scientist, right? I was trained up, and I'm a Western scientist, and what we try to do is eliminate unknowns, right? I mean, so when you're a scientist, you want to study something, you take it out of its environment. First of all, that way you get rid of everything it's interacting with. Now you can study it. You can break it into pieces. You remove it from the context of itself, and then you try to find the principle underneath it so you can exploit it. If this is a plant, this means you take it out of its environment and you plant it in a field and you plant 1,000 copies and you're growing fields and stuff. And so it's like interchangeable. It doesn't matter where the field is. You just bulldoze the land and you do it. And that's like, I think, very different than indigenous technologies, because with indigenous stuff, they leave the plant in the woods. Their goal isn't to feed an exponentially growing number of people. It's to have a balance, right? So you leave it there. And whatever techniques you come up with are very specific for that environment. So the context is there. All the connections to everything else is there. It's exponentially complex. There's a lot of unknowns, and you live with the unknowns instead of destroying the unknowns. And so I think a lot of times that's what I did. I pulled it out. I said, look, whatever this thing is, it only works when it's embodied in its context, where it's at. You can't pick it up and move it. It isn't like that. It isn't what we expect from that way. So if you're trying to look and suss out the decisions I'm making, then that's where that comes from. I'm trying to think of a local, sustainable, context-specific sort of technologies that exist in Spyro and have been there for a long time.
I found your depiction of, like, the wearable AI glasses
Yeah.
very, like, interesting, and also so close to, like, feeling so achievable,
Yeah. Well, I mean, like a novel like Robopocalypse, like all of that stuff happened already. So like that novel came out like 10 years ago or longer. And like almost all of that stuff happened. And so it's not hard to predict stuff that's going to happen in the next 5 years. Although I'm pretty much not stoked about wearables, because I think it's just another avenue for billionaires to collect data from us to make us into the product that's going to feed their AIs. But don't get me going.
Well, I mean, I would love to talk about, like, your point of view when it came to writing all these depictions of wearable technology. The NICs, I thought was very interesting, and when you described, like, how exactly it sort of took in all the data, I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, because AI just relies on eating data, and if you just have it as a wearable, then you're constantly feeding it.
Yeah, it's always listening. It's always paying attention. So, I have a NASA astrophysicist character named Michaela Johnson, who's wearing a NICS pair of augmented reality glasses that ostensibly she doesn't care about people much. So she kind of needs these to keep track of everyone's name and maybe what expression they're giving her and stuff like that, because she's not a people-focused type of human, and lots of people are that way. And so I really put that in there because I wanted to play with the idea that she wants to understand, she wants to like look into the face of God. That's like, she's such a scientist that she's not necessarily worried about being a human or interacting with other people, So if anybody's going to kind of go over to the other side or like decide that they have totally dissociated from humanity entirely, then it would be Michaela, right? And there's some reasons for that, As a character, she was inspired by a NASA engineer that I interviewed who happened to be deaf. And she described her time at NASA as being pretty lonely because all of her colleagues who are super nerds like her can't speak ASL. And then all of the deaf community aren't nerds like her. And so they don't have anything to talk about. And Michaela's a little bit like that. She's black, she's young, she's female, she's a super math nerd, and she's not what people expect at NASA. And then outside of NASA, she doesn't act the way people think she should act either. So she's a character that's really, her she's almost dissociated from humanity entirely, and so that's a pretty interesting perspective to have whenever you're meeting an alien.
Yeah. So while you were writing this book, you were also jointly writing the script for the movie?
Yeah, that's right. So when I was cooking up the book and doing the early writing of it, I teamed up with Sterling Harjo, who's amazing director and writer. He did Reservation Dogs. He's just done The Lowdown, and he is really, I mean, the epitome of like Oklahoma, like including real Oklahoma, real Tulsa, as a character in his work. And so I knew there was no better person to do, and he's native too, and so there's no better person to sort of represent this on the screen. He's also got clout. He's shown people that he's really good at his job, and so he's got the kind of just a perfect person for saying, hey, like, let's really represent Oklahoma. Let's really represent these characters in an accurate way. And so I have been adapting that script. So I wrote the book. Now I'm writing the screenplay of my book for Netflix and for Sterling and for Aggregate. That's our production company. That's Jason Bateman's company. So it's a cool sort of experience, right? Because I've got the book version in my head where pretty much I'm the man, whatever I say goes. It's my world. And then I've got this other much more collaborative version, which is evolving, as we write it, into something that I'm loving. So, yes, I can't wait to see, how both of these things do. And I would love to see this on the screen. Obviously, it's just, it's very Oklahoma, like, it's just all the people and the places, from growing up are pivotal to this project.
Yeah. Yeah, you talked about the Spiro Mounds, and they're featured really prominently in the book, and I was just curious, did you go back there, walk around?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I went back and researched the mounds and Spiro itself, as a town. Sterling and I went on a hot day and nearly died walking the mounds. And, the mounds aren't that tall out there at Spiro. We were walking around and we're like, we're going to need some stunt mounds. Get these things up into the air, get them higher. But, certainly that's also kind of, my backyard growing up out of my grandparents' farm. It's in that same area. So just, the sounds and the smells and the sights, again, it's just like coming home. So,
Yeah. Is it hard to try and to describe something that's so familiar to you in a way that other people who've never been there, and to try and make it interesting to them when it's literally your backyard?
Yeah, no, I think it's easier, because I know what's normal and what's weird and what fits and what doesn't. Mostly, I'm sure I'm making mistakes. Everybody does at some point, but for me, it's really like just closing my eyes and going back and then describing, what I feel. And so I'll tell you, that's a lot easier than having never been someplace and trying to like look at a picture or read something and figure out what's interesting about it. Like, I know what I love about Oklahoma and I put it straight in, it's pretty easy for me.
Yeah. So knowing that you were going to try and adapt this into a script, how did it affect writing the book?
Well, I've been writing screenplays for a long time now, as long as I've been writing novels. And so those two careers, I've always been in different places. I was a novice screenwriter, but my novels are doing real well. I spent a lot of time writing screenplays. And so mainly I wanted to make it easy on myself with the adaptation. No jumping around in time, no jumping around the world too much. Let's have solid emotional stories with a few characters. And so I made it easy on myself, and I did what I kind of consider, I fought out of my own corner. I set this up so it's stuff I know, and it's people I know, and really I didn't leave myself a whole bunch of hard work, That said, it's obviously hard work to adapt a novel, but I tried to make it as easy as possible. So, the novel is very visual. The novel has really clear themes. The settings are really clear and verdant and drawn out, so you can really see where you're at. So, I did my best to make it easy on myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You wrote the entire book in present tense, and I found that very yeah, very cinematic because you're just there, moment to moment.
I always do that. I actually find third person, the past tense or whatever, to be, it takes me out of the moment. I like to just jump in and I'm there. I'm inside that person's body. I'm them, and we're just, let's go.
Mm-hmm. Well, were there any other people that you sort of based any other characters on?
Jim, the Jim character, who lives out in Spyro, and he's just been reunited with his teenage daughter, who he hasn't been around to raise for the last couple of years, and he's lost a son, and he's had trouble with alcohol, and he's had trouble sort of with connecting to his traditions and his culture because he feels forsaken. All this terrible stuff's happened. Really digging into that character and all that drama and stuff, that for me was the kind of the heart of the novel. Sorry, that was heart of the novel. Yeah, so that was the heart of the novel for me. Some of the hardest stuff, but also the most emotional human stuff that I was really digging into my own. I have a teenager, I'm a parent. All that stuff, was really personal, and getting it in there made it, I thought, some of the most powerful stuff in the book.
Yeah. So this is the Okie Geek podcast. So we just celebrate a lot of geek stuff. So I'm wondering if there were any movies, TV shows, books that really inspired you to write this book, or you kind of drew influence on.
This is kind of, it exists in contrast to all the alien invasion stories, right? Alien invasions, they show up, they do to us what colonizers have done to indigenous people. And so this is not that. So I love those, I love Independence Day. But this is maybe more of an arrival, or a contact than your classic alien invasion, or like a District 9, or, that kind of stuff, which I love. So really it exists as in a contrast to all of the great science fiction alien invasion movies that we've seen.
Mm-hmm. Was there anything that you and Sterling talked about that when you were talking about this movie that really made you bond over the idea?
Well, man, you asked earlier, do you think aliens could be real? Do you? I don't know, right? That's a great, that's probably, if we bonded on anything, it's what do you think, man? What? Because stuff is getting crazy, right? So, just bonding over that. And then just over sort of small town, Sterling grew up out there, Holtonville, so he used to play Spyro, in football, in high school and stuff. So he's Spyro, and I'm yeah, man, we got that in common. We're both Oklahomans. He's still here, representing. And so certainly we just bonded over that shared background, and just over, maybe just a little bit dude, what's up there? What's out there in outer space?
Yeah. What do you hope people get out of this book after they finish reading?
Yeah, I hope that people walk away understanding that different perspective toward the unknown. Because you got that soldier character who wants to destroy it. You got the scientist who wants to understand it. And that's really well represented. We see that all the time. But then you have this native guy living out there who understands, or comes to understand, that even the most foreign, alien-seeming thing is part of our fabric. It's part of our unknown, is just part of our world, right? We're walking through the unknown all the time, right now. Stuff's happening all around us that we're not aware of. And to be able to acknowledge that and have some respect for it, and also just find a way to live alongside it, that could be an important perspective to have, especially since we don't know what's going to be happening in the future. And we may have to reassess, where we are in the cosmos and where humanity stands. And so if you're going to live in fear, or, if you're going to try to understand something that can't be understood, then it's not going to be good for you. So I hope people come away with sort of understanding that other perspective on the unknown.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Hey, this was a pleasure, man. Thank you.